Hello, my name is Alex Isles and welcome to Newcastle's Castle. This here is the lower hall and would have been the offices of the Sheriff of Northumberland. Now, the Sheriff of Northumberland, today we'd understand him as a civil servant. He was the King's representative here in the northeast of England and would have been responsible for things like justice, collection of taxes, organising the defence of the region, coordinating with the barons and the lords of the region, and also working with town officials as well to make sure that the King's justice, the King's order and the king's wishes were put out into the region and the area was controlled and properly administered. So it's a very important position. And so down here in the lower hall, this would have been his offices. Now, the reason why he didn't do it upstairs in the Great Hall is because the Great Hall represented the king. The Great Hall would be where the king would hold court. So if you have the Sheriff of Northumberland going upstairs and doing all of his business in the Great Hall, he's kind of stepping on royal power. He shouldn't be doing that. So instead, the lower hall here is perfectly suitable for him to come to do his business, to sort out everything, to meet with local powerful individuals, local lords, barons, and town officials, rather than upstairs, which is where the king would knight knights, would receive oaths of fealty, would also be able to create new lords and give out land, all of those sort of things, very royal and powerful decisions, whereas down here we're looking at a much more civic level of power. And so this is why the lower hall was perfect for the Sheriff of Northumberland. Now, the castle today has put some wonderful different interpretations into this room, and I'll just take you around them as well. So to start off with, we have a sergeant's armour. Now, a sergeant was a professional soldier ranking lower than a knight. He wasn't a nobleman. He would have been a common man, but he would have chosen the life of a professional soldier. So he would be equipped similarly to a knight, but not exactly the same. He would have his own mail armour, more commonly known as a chainmail shirt, but in the Middle Ages it would be known as mail. He has his shield. He would also have a spear, a sword or a mace or an axe, a secondary weapon. He has his helmet, and he's a professional soldier. And we know at various times additional sergeants were actually sent to Newcastle's castle to fortify this location and to ensure that it was properly defended, especially when there was war with Scotland. So if 12 sergeants are being sent to aid the militia and the local forces here in the garrison, each one of them must have been quite a considerable individual, probably helping to give training, helping to bolster the defences, and maybe also bringing their own retinue of other soldiers as well. So it would have definitely helped Newcastle's castle. Over here as well, we also have a fantastic bit of history, because this is all of the castles in England, in the Scottish borders, and around Scotland as well. So we've got a number of defensive fortifications on the Anglo-Scottish border. And it just shows you how hard this area was fought over, with all of these castles required to defend against one side or the other. So it tells a story of conflict, it tells the story of the Anglo-Scottish wars, and eventually how Scotland became its own independent nation. But at the same time, later on, obviously, England and Scotland came together to form the British Isles as we know them today, alongside Wales and Northern Ireland. Over here, we can see some of the baronies and families of the northeast of England. So these are the important landed families who would have been responsible for defending the border. They would have been granted land, and some of these are quite famous. So the white cross on the red background, that's the Neville family. And the Nevilles were incredibly powerful in County Durham. We've also got the Scrope family right next to them, and the Ogles, who were knightly families who regularly fought in the Anglo-Scottish wars, and on occasions they would also be fighting on the Scottish side as well. We have references of various Ogles fighting for the Scots as well as for the English. And then above them we can see the names of like the family, the Knight of Darcy of Gilsland, the De Ross family, the Clifford families, the Heron families, and the Balliols. And so Balliols is actually one of the families who eventually would become kings of Scotland, John Balliol. So these are quite important families up here in the northeast of England, and their stories can be seen throughout the whole of the castle. Each of these families as well was also responsible for sending knights for the defence of Newcastle's castle too. So there would have been quite a few knights stationed here, but they wouldn't have lived inside the castle themselves. They would have probably lived on houses which are now just at the bottom of what is Westgate Road today in Newcastle. We can also see over here a wonderful range of exhibition cases which have finds from archaeology on the site. So we've got things from the English Civil War, or as it better should be known, the War of Three Kingdoms. We've got medieval pottery and medieval metalworking, and then some earlier stuff like Anglo-Saxon, Norman and Roman finds. But on top of that as well, I'm not sure how clearly you can see, but just above that, there is a wonderful example of Stone Age finds as well, where there were Stone Age axes here too. Coming into this room though, this is the room belonging to the Sheriff of Northumberland, and this would have been his bedroom, a solar. So in here it's been done out like a medieval room, but he would have had his bed in the far corner. He would have probably had desks so that he could work here, and it would be a place where he could sleep and keep himself warm next to the fireplace as well. So it would have been his rooms when he wasn't doing official business. He likely also had a house either within the castle or within Newcastle where he would live with his family. But this is like when you're working late at the office, you can go through to your bedroom and fall asleep here as well. So it's his official room within the castle, just off from his main study. And he's quite fortunate as well, because if we just come down through here, he's got his own ensuite. Now, originally, this wall would have been here, but it was dug through during the 19th century during work done on the castle. So because of that, it's now visible today, and they added in a window as well. But this wouldn't have had the window or the wall, so it would be quite a dark room. But just looking down there, it's a nice steep drop to the bottom, and that's where the waste would have gone down when he's using the toilet, and it would been cleaned out every so often by someone whose profession would be known as a gong farmer, a person who was responsible for emptying the toilets within the castle. So you can see he's got an ensuite room, he's got his own bedroom right here, which he can rest and sleep in, and that's where he can come for downtime. And then his own offices and own hall here, where him, his retainers, his close friends can gather, but he can also do the business required to keep Northumberland working. So that's just a sort of a bit of a story of the lower hall right here in the castle, the role of the Sheriff of Northumberland, and the importance that this would have had within the northeast of England, especially in the periods with the wars with Scotland and all of the conflict going on at that time. Welcome to the Great Hall of Newcastle's Castle. Now, the first thing to start off with is that the name, the Great Hall, is actually a Victorian name. During the Middle Ages, this would not have been referred to as the Great Hall. Instead, that would have been another building outside of the castle keep. So just outside of the castle and down today where we have the courts and the Vermont Hotel, next to there would have been the Great Hall, which was a two-story building. The top level would have had a hall inside, and that would have been for feasting and eating and drinking, a very sociable space. And underneath that, on the ground level, there would be kitchens, there would be wine cellars, food stores, and it was very much a place to have food and drink and almost like your social activities involved down there. Up here, on the other hand, in the hall of the castle, this would have been a space for the king, the monarch. You may have still had eating and drinking in here, but not in the same way as you'd have had in the Great Hall, which would have been very much your social side. So that would be where you would want to make friends with the lords and the barons and bring them together and have a social space there. But up here in the Great Hall, this is where the king holds court. This is where royal power is given. This is where people are knighted. This is where oaths of fealty are taken and land is distributed and given out. So it's a very much an official place, kind of like a courtroom today, or like wherever the king is. That's also where you can hold parliament. That's also where you can have court cases that are very high end. You know, those sort of really important decisions happen wherever the king is. And this room here actually has a lot of influence with this Anglo-Scottish wars, and it's very important in both England English and Scottish history. But just before we do that, I'll show you some features of the room that I like talking about. So to start off with, we have some wonderful banners right here on the wall. So we have the royal banner of England. Then we also have the Ogle family right here, the Umfraville banner. We have the Nevilles, who were an incredibly powerful family in County Durham, and one of the Nevilles was actually given the moniker the Kingmaker because he was able to decide who would become monarch. And then over here we have the Lords of Northumberland, the Percy family, and both the Nevilles and the Percys, sometimes they were friends, sometimes they were enemies, sometimes they would marry each other. So the best way to describe them would be the modern term frenemy, sometimes close allies, sometimes enemies, because they were looking to become the most powerful families in the north of England. The actual structure of this hall would have been quite different in the past. So up around the banners, you can see holes in the walls. Those smaller holes are actually where, in the past, there would have been the medieval roof for this hall. So that would have gone up there, and everything above that would have actually been outside. So that's the medieval roof, and anything above that is open to the elements. The holes you can see that are massive down here, just below the banners, those ones are just following around the room here, they're actually from the English Civil War, or as it should be known, the War of Three Kingdoms between England, Scotland and Ireland. There would have been massive oak beams put across there, and they would have actually rested cannons on that level. And when they rested cannons on that level, that was because at the time, parliamentarian forces had actually taken Gateshead. And so the castle was being used as a firing platform for the royalist cannons to fire out at Gateshead at the south bank of the River Tyne, opposite Newcastle. And so that's there for the royalist guns to fire out on the parliamentarians, and in the same way, the parliamentarians were firing back at the royalists at Newcastle as well. So there was a bit of a conflict going on there as well in the history too. I mentioned before that this hall had seen important events that basically had an effect on both English and Scottish history. And it's because in the hall here, this is the location where Edward I, Edward Longshanks, also known as the Hammer of the Scots, took the oath of fealty from John Balliol, who became King of Scots. Now, this had all been caused in motion because the last King of Scots had died. And when he died, his closest relation was Margaret, Maid of Norway, who was the daughter of the King of Norway, and her mother had been a Scottish princess. So because of that, she comes across from Norway to England, and she's going to marry Edward II, which would therefore bring together the English and Scottish dynasties, and maybe would have resulted in a united kingdom back then. Reality is he probably would have had two sons, and one would become King of Scotland, one would become King of England, and there would have still been a lot of warfare going on in the kingdoms anyway. But it's nice to sort of tie up history romantically and go, oh yes, England and Scotland would have been one nation together even back then, when in matter of fact, obviously, we've had long conflicts that have resulted to us becoming the United Kingdom you see as today. And even with all of the politics going on in the world, I think you can say that most English people and Scottish people get on really well and just see ourselves as a part of the mixture of peoples in the British Isles. But what happens is that Margaret, on her way over from Norway, passes away, and so she can't marry Edward II. When she can't marry Edward II, the Scottish nobles start coming together and trying to figure out who has the greatest claim, and eventually boils down to two families, the Balliol family and the Bruce family. So you've got John Balliol and you have Robert the Bruce. What happens is that those two men are then invited by Edward I, who has a very deep interest on who's going to become the next King of Scotland, and they start talking out, and what happens is that John Balliol probably makes some nice deals with Edward in the background, and Edward decides that actually Balliol should be King of Scots. And so he's made King of Scotland. Edward comes up here to Newcastle, Balliol comes down, they have a feast, and Balliol pays homage and swears fealty to him as King of Scotland for his English territories. And there's a lot of things going on there, but this would have been quite common in the Middle Ages because Edward I also had to swear allegiance to the King of France for his French territories. And so because of that, there was always this thing going on where, would the King of France have seen Edward as his sub-king? Would he have considered England as a part of his territory? Probably not. But the way that Edward I interpreted this swearing of fealty was that John Balliol was his vassal. He was his sublord, and he was the High King of all of Britain, England, Scotland, and Wales all together, and he was the over-king, whereas John Balliol was under him as a sub-king. John Balliol, probably on the other hand, probably heard it slightly differently and saw it as like, oh, I'm swearing fealty for my territories in England. This then resulted in a long war. John Balliol was seen as a bit of a puppet king, and he's actually referred to as the hollow cloak, which is in Scots, which is not a very nice thing to say to someone. It's just like, look, you're just wearing the mantle of a king, you're just a puppet. And so Balliol lost his throne, and it started the Anglo-Scottish Wars. Bruce fought, and eventually Bruce becomes King of Scots. And so inside this room here, that's where one of the events that caused the Anglo-Scottish Wars and so many of those conflicts that lasted for, hundreds of years across the borders with raiding and bad blood between both sides was just caused by an event here where Edward I sat in this room and just listened to, Balliol swearing fealty, but it had a very different meaning for both men. Alongside this here, we have another room. So I'll just take you up here, just off the Great Hall. And this room here is what's considered a very pleasant prison. And you'll look at it and go, this doesn't seem very pleasant, Alex. But this here is a prison just off the side of the Great Hall. Now this prison here is, because it's off the side of the Great Hall, would mean it's very easy access for someone to be able to come along and they'll be imprisoned inside here. But they've also got access to the Great Hall as well. So they can be taken down to the Great Hall and be a part of events in there as well. And it's also quite a high status prison, because just along inside here, we've actually got an ensuite toilet or a garderobe. So just here you've got a loo and then the prison itself. And so this would have probably been for very high status individuals to be locked inside here and kept inside here under lock and key, but they were still nobility or very important individuals. So you would probably have a nice bed in here, probably some form of entertainment, and it'd be allowed visitation rights. But at the same time, if we just look down in here, you can see the hole where a large beam of wood would have gone across the door to stop them leaving any time they wanted. And it's very likely that Robert the Bruce's sister, when she was captured, was kept inside of that room. She's the sister to a man of royal blood, a man who has a claim to be king. And so she can't be harmed, but you want to make sure that you have her so you can control her brother. And so she was likely kept in there, but brought down here for events, for social life with the other lords and ladies. And she wouldn't have been kept in a dungeon or anything like that, because she's a high status woman. At the other end, which is not a prison, right through here, we have the Queen's Solar, or the Queen's Room. And this isn't actually, there isn't any evidence to suggest that this was actually a bedroom for a royal woman, but it's definitely the high status room for traveling female and male royals. So when the king visited Newcastle, this is the room he would stay in. This is where Edward I would have stayed. This is where other high status lords and officials would have had their bedroom. And when they would have stayed here, obviously, just like in the prison, you've just got off this room its own ensuite toilet as well. So just there, another toilet for the royal bottom. And then just along here, you would have come back into your room where you would have had a very nice bed, and it would have been an incredibly comfortable and high luxury room for someone who is so close to the Great Hall, where this is an incredibly powerful place of politics. The room is also special because you've got this fireplace. And this fireplace is one of the oldest fireplaces in England. It dates back to the the Norman period. So it's a late Norman fireplace, and you've got these wonderful features in it that just just a part of Norman architecture. And I love that we've got this old fireplace right here in this room that has lasted from when the castle was built all the way through in this really high status room, which would have been warm and comfortable, and a place where then a royal could come out and hold court and make decisions that would have a massive impact on nations, but also on history as well. So I really hope I've been able to show you around the Great Hall of Newcastle Castle, tell you some of its stories, show you some of the things inside here, and explain why I love it so much, and why it's had such a big impact on both English, Scottish, and European history. So why don't you like and subscribe, share the video with your friends, and if you'd like to support me further, I also have a Ko-fi account and a Patreon account down in the description. That just means that I can set aside time for these episodes and to really focus on bringing the history to life for you. As you can see, I obviously have a passion for. In the meantime though, stay safe and well, and thank you so much.